critical part of Alberta's history has been scrubbed. Here on Alberta Unfiltered today, you'll find out what you don't know and never will if you don't watch this video. Why, as an Albertan, should you learn this history? Do you know why Alberta became a province in Canada in 1905? I'll tell you. I'm Marilyn Burns, host of Alberta Unfiltered, and you are going to be shocked. We've heard the question, if the people of Alberta had the choice to do it all over again, knowing what they know now, would they have joined Canada as a province in 1905? I'm going to say they sure would have, and I'll explain why. It's because Ottawa treated the territories very badly, and you need to know what happened. It starts with an uncomfortable truth. The Ottawa Liberals have deleted a very important man from Alberta's history. So did the 1905 era Alberta Liberals, who were the majority of Albertans at that time, and they discarded this giant of a man. Saskatchewan embraced and honored him. A long time ago, and not so far away, the vast area of land that included the Yukon, the Arctic Islands, Alberta, Saskatchewan, parts of Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec were together called the Northwest Territories. This huge region was managed by the Ottawa government. It was a rugged frontier land, not for the faint of heart. I'd like to introduce you to Frederick Holtain. If he lived today, we might call him Fred, the way many Albertans think of Ralph Klein as Ralph. He contributed so much to the territories that King Edward VII knighted him Sir Frederick Holtain. Why has Ottawa wanted to delete Mr. Holtain? According to Grant McLeod, who wrote the book Frontier Statesman of the Canadian West, in 1984, 27-year-old Mr. Holtain took a 4-day train ride from Toronto to Calgary, a town of a whopping 428 people. He decided to keep going to Fort McLeod, 100 trail miles away by stagecoach, along trails, across the Oldman River, uphill and downhill. There in the colorful little town of Fort McLeod, Holtain hung up a shingle to practice law, and before long had a ready clientele of bootleggers and cattle rustlers. He was a popular man in Fort McLeod. He sang in the Anglican church choir, played soccer and tennis, and when he got his first horse, he organized polo matches in the town. The area was made up of whites, Indians, and Métis. Shortly after Holtain came to Fort McLeod, the people elected a local council. But really, the whole area was ruled by one man, a lieutenant governor appointed by Ottawa, and there was little to no money sent out from Ottawa to build the territories. How did the territories raise their own money? By licensing billiard tables and fining gamblers. Fort McLeod had a local watering hole owned by a fellow named Harry Taylor. Mr. Taylor hosted feisty political chatter over food and whiskey around a long table that came to be known as Taylor's Table. Mr. Holtain joined in and before long became a leader in Fort McLeod. Above all, he was known to be absolutely incorruptible, a quiet, stubborn, and gracious man who commanded great respect but was despised by the Ottawa Liberal government. Holtain began to push Ottawa hard for schools. Grant McLeod says that everyone recognized that Holtain is the single greatest force for the reason that schools were established in the territories. But it was a hard fight for Holtain and his supporters against Ottawa. Holtain became the first premier of the Northwest Territories, and at that time, he was responsible for the entire region between the US and the far north, from Ontario to British Columbia. He ran a tight budget. The territories had no debt while he was premier of the territories. Under Holtain, the territories were constantly asking Ottawa for greater autonomy, but this fell on deaf ears. Frank Oliver, editor of the Edmonton Bulletin, wrote, "The Northwest is under a despotism as absolute or more so than which curses Russia. The people were angry with Ottawa. The Taylor Table people in Fort McLeod wrote a Bill of Rights and sent it to Ottawa. The people in Manitoba took up arms in the Northwest Rebellion. Holtain pushed hard for an elected, non-partisan representative government and was successful in that effort as well. He pushed hard for the territories, and for that, Ottawa despised him. The 1898 Klondike Gold Rush caused a conflict between the territory and the Ottawa government. The trek to Yukon took half a summer. The territories had the right to license saloons and taverns to earn money, but the heavy drinking was too much of a temptation for Ottawa, and so Ottawa divided the Yukon territories out of the Northwest territories so it could take the booze licensing money. Now for some familiar names in Alberta. In about 1897 or so, Calgary lawyer James Lougheed became an Ottawa senator and went looking for a junior partner for his law firm. He chose R.B. Bennett from the Hopewell Cape beside the Bay of Fundy. R.B. Bennett was interested in politics, and the rumor was, according to Grant McEwen, that Bennett was interested in Holtain's job as Premier of the Northwest Territories. Bennett went digging and thought he found an accounting error on Holtain's part and went public. There had been a receipt entered on the public accounts in 1896 for $45,000, but only $20,000 was accounted for. On April 18, 1900, the Regina Standard headline read, "Cooked Accounts, How the Territorial Treasurer Made $20,000. Of course, the Territorial Treasurer was Holtain. What did Holtain do with this allegation? He calmly asked for a select committee to conduct an audit investigation, which Mr. Bennett voted against. The select committee found out that Ottawa had promised $45,000 to the territories, but it only sent the territories $25,000. The $45,000 had been posted as a receipt when it was really only a promise. The territory's Legislative Assembly accepted this information, but Mr. Bennett and two other members rejected the auditor's report. Mr. R.B. Bennett went on to become a Canadian Prime Minister. Holtain pushed hard for an appeals court in the territories and succeeded in that effort. The territories were always starved for funding from Ottawa. The people genuinely thought that if they could become a province, if they could only become a province, they could earn and gain Ottawa's respect and stop being treated so terribly by Ottawa. Manitoba had been carved out of the territories because of Louis Riel's Northwest Rebellion. The Yukon was out. There arose great debate about whether there should be drawn a line between part of the territories so that there would be two provinces, or the territory should remain as one. Holtain fought in hope of having one province. Liberal Prime Minister Laurier had no interest in letting the territories become a province at all. Holtain pushed hard for the best interest of the territories, and for that, Ottawa despised him. Up to the early 1900s, Ottawa would give the territories meager grants to build infrastructure. Flooding and time broke down the bridges around Lethbridge and Fort McLeod, and the territories begged Ottawa for grant money, more grant money, to build the bridges. Instead, Ottawa offered that the money to build the bridges would be a loan, not a grant. Holtain refused to accept a loan. He believed in being debt-free. The stalemate continued until Laurier was faced with a coming federal election. He then promised that if the people in the territories would vote Liberal, he would allow the territories to become a province or provinces. Holtain, though, campaigned against Laurier and said that it was more likely that the Conservatives would grant provincial status than Laurier. But Laurier ultimately kept his promise. Holtain, as Premier of the Territories, fought to keep the territories together in one province and lost. In 1905, a boundary divided Alberta and Saskatchewan, and the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan were created by legislation. Laurier appointed 2 Liberal premiers of the new provinces, both Liberals. Alberta's first appointed premier was Liberal Premier Rutherford. The long-standing premier of the territories, Frederick Holtain, was shunned by Ottawa. Even though Rutherford was the first appointed Alberta Liberal premier, the people of Alberta overwhelmingly voted for him in the first provincial election. The people of Alberta at the time were all in Liberal, federally and provincially. It was the same in Saskatchewan. Holtain stayed in Saskatchewan after that time and was elected as opposition leader. In 1912, though, he resigned from politics and set out to practice law in Regina. But before he could get his feet wet practicing law, he was appointed Chief Justice of the Saskatchewan courts. On June 1st, 1916, he was given a knighthood, and in 1917, he was elected Chancellor of the University of Saskatchewan, where he served for 22 years until he got married and lived happily ever after. At the age of 80 years old, Holtain got married for the second time. He'd been in a difficult first marriage, but at age 80, Holtain expressed, "A man is 80 only once." 1 month later, he resigned as Chief Justice of the Court of Appeal of Saskatchewan. He'd been Chief Justice for 26 years. He moved to Montreal, where he lived happily ever after until the age of 84, to be forgotten by Alberta. Let's not forget Frederick Holtain, the kind of stand-up man that formed the bedrock of Alberta, who fought against Ottawa just as Premier Lougheed had to fight against Pierre Trudeau. Let's remember that before Alberta became a province, Ottawa had treated the territories terribly. So would the people of Alberta have made a different decision back then if they knew then what we know now? I think they would have made the same decision because Ottawa had treated the territories so badly. Now we Albertans know we must focus on going forward. I invite your comments. We need to work forward. If you like what you're hearing and what you're learning on Alberta Unfiltered, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for being with us on Alberta Unfiltered.
From the mountains to the prairies.